couple people told me that these things were really good, and I've tried a lot of brushed whoop products. I haven't tried the alien whoops, but I picked these up because they're kind of a new breed of brushless whoop, and the brushless whoops have been around for quite a while now, but this is kind of like, it's just like a regular whoop. It has everything built into one board. It's got the ESCs and everything in that one board, so there's no fuss, no hassle. The motors still plug in with connectors, and it's really a whoop, just brushless. And for as bad as that Hubsan thing was, these two are I cannot even believe that some random thing from Banggood, from a company named Happy Model, which is actually a big company, is so good. These fly incredible. They really fly amazing. Now, they're not powerhouses by any means, and they're not like, you know, the most incredible quad I've ever flown, but they are so much fun, and they're probably some of the most fun quads I've ever flown. So that's the review for you there, but I'm going to compare these two since I got these two, because I wanted to compare the plastic body to the aluminum and carbon body, because this is the Snapper, and the Snapper comes in a 75 and a 65, just like this UR. Actually, the UR only comes in a 65 and a whole bunch of other variants of UR, US, UK, whatever. Anyways, so what I found was, in the brushed whoop products, I actually preferred the smaller size because I felt like it was a lot more nimble and it wasn't really less powerful. In the brushless category, both of these perform excellent, but I prefer the larger one because it's just got larger props, got more thrust, got more power, got more flight time, just kind of everything more. But the smaller one is slightly more nimble. Now, this one is using 0603 motors, this one's using 0703 motors. I have no idea if that makes a difference, but let's take a look at these motors because they're really, really interesting. I don't know if you can see here, but if you can see the magnets, look how tightly packed those magnets are together. On both of these motors, the 06 is even harder to see because of the base, but look, I mean, they are really strong feeling magnets, really notchy motors. I wouldn't be surprised if I took that clip off, I'd find a bearing underneath that bushing under there too, underneath the washer. These motors perform, I'm floored by something that's so cheap and so random on Banggood that it could perform this well. So I mean, that's kind of, I'm really impressed with these two things. All that being said, I wouldn't recommend the Snapper because these aluminum rims, they bend up every single time you crash. Anything you hit, the aluminum prop guard will bend. And also, I think that the frame will weigh a lot less if it was plastic. So there's actually another product on Banggood. It's the BSBAHK, whatever it is. This, I'll link. It's the links in the below, but it's the plastic version of this. However, the description says that it's running 0603 motors on a 75 size, so it has a smaller motor on the bigger frame, but it also has a plastic frame, which is what I think is probably going to be better on the 75 size. If you haven't figured it out yet, I prefer the 75 size. But if I was to recommend one of these two, I'd probably recommend the 65 because the frame is just less hassle. And on top of that, if you put quad blades on there, it comes with tri-blades. If you put quad blades on there, which I highly recommend you do on both of these, I don't have quad blades of this size, but if you put quad blades on there, it performs much, much, much better, much more controlled. It's really so fun to fly. The other thing I want to say about this is that they're both using the same control board, which is super interesting. I don't know why it's that interesting to me, but it's interesting that they're using the same one. I would expect the same one to be, you know, copied over to the other versions of this craft as well. Unfortunately, it is an F3 chip. It is not an F4 chip, so it will not run 8K, 8K. It will run 8K, 4K, and I have my tune on screen for these two, the actual tune for these, because when it does come, it doesn't come with a proper tune. It comes with not auto level, but accelerometer on, and it just, unfortunately, they didn't give you like the proper tune. And I don't know anything how to tune, but I've kind of put my normal settings, my customary settings on there, and I have kind of played around with it and gotten a pretty good tune out of it. And so I was just on the screen here, so if you know, feel free to try them out. I would highly recommend this because it's just so damn fun, and I have bashed these up really hard so far, and they have survived. One thing I would say is if you do get this aluminum body one, you have to Loctite these motor screws on. They will fall out. I lost a bunch of them, and I happen to have like an eyeglass screw repair kit that had screws that happen to fit because they're like M1.4 or something. Other than that, they come with these little charger things, which are really neat. They charge with any battery that you plug in. One for the bigger one for the smaller one. I haven't really found a big variation from battery to battery. All the batteries typically perform pretty similarly. The Happy model batteries that it comes with, the GNB 450 that it comes with. I also have, surprisingly, this Eachine. What is this? This Eachine 450 is the best performing one on the Snapper 7 because I think it's lighter than the other batteries. All that being said, these are China, like super China products, so I don't know what the longevity is going to be on them, but so far they've held up really good, and I'm really impressed with how well they perform. Let's move on from there. So Furious had been talking to me a while back about making a goggle wire. So goggle wires have become quite popular. I told them, why are you making a goggle wire? Why don't you just make a pair of goggles? Because that's much better than a wire. And what does Furious do? They go all crazy on making a goggle wire. And it is an interesting wire. I mean, it's a nice little wire. The actual wire is nice silicone, and it has two power on buttons, one that's right by your goggles, one that's on right by the battery wire. And you push either button and the thing turns on, and it has all sorts of little features like a voltage readout and like a battery alarm, and I think it just turned off because the battery was low. I don't really know. I told them, this is probably overkill for such a product, but it is cool. When I finally got it in my hand and used it, I was actually impressed with it. Yeah, I really wish that they would just consider making a goggle product altogether. If you didn't notice, the lighting keeps changing because I forgot to talk about a couple things. So this is the HQ 5.1 by 3.1 by 3. HQ loves their confusing naming schemes. And this is like the second or third, maybe fourth, I don't know, version of this 3-pitch 5.1 prop that HQ has made. This 5.1 prop that they've made is really good. And so they tried to make this shallower pitch as an acro blade. It's geared directly towards acro. It just has a shallower pitch. And the way HQ makes props is that they come up with a design and they make a finished mold, a finished product. They make a whole bunch of them, send them out to a ton of people, and then wait for feedback. And then they remake an entirely new prop. So this is like the most inefficient and most expensive way of making props, but it might be the best way because everybody is trying a finished prop with the finished material, not some 3D printed or computer modeled random thing. And so I'm very happy to say that this prop is really, really good. It is very, 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 very similar to the T-Motor 5143, which I love. I love this blade. I loved it from the moment I flew it. I couldn't believe how good it was. It's super light and it's super responsive. There are some differences between these two props, however. So the main difference is pretty obvious. The HQ blade is going to be far more durable than the T-Motor blade, and that alone is probably going to be enough for anybody that's using this T-Motor blade to at least consider using the HQ blade. That being said, the throttle response profile is different on the HQ blade. I'm comparing these two because they're the closest comparison to one another, and I think by now a lot of people have tried the T-Motor prop because it's always sold out at Puraflip. So the throttle response of the T-Motor prop is much more gentle at the low end of the throttle, and then it picks up faster and faster as it goes up in the RPMs. The throttle response on the HQ prop is actually less controllable on the low end of the throttle. It has more of a traditional throttle, like the bottom end of the throttle does have some power, whereas the T-Motor prop doesn't have as much power. The grip is really good. Both of them have excellent grip. The speed on the T-Motor prop is actually higher at the top end. So that's kind of a little bit where the HQ blade suffers as well. The response is also just a hair faster on the T-Motor blade. And I've said they're completely different, but they're really not. These two props are very, very similar. I'm really just splitting hairs. You got to try the two. It really does feel just slightly different, so compare them and see which one you like more. I would just recommend you give the HQ a try, because if you like those, they are so much more durable. You won't have to swap out your props as often. And I really wish we had Popo Pro shafts on actually good motors. Unfortunately, Get FPV may have shot themselves in the foot and released the regular Popo, which was a mess and kind of left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And so I really hope that the Popo Pro makes a comeback and gets a chance, but it seems like nobody really wants to make a Popo Pro motor, even though I try to get them to, but they just don't really care. So the next thing I want to show you guys is this thing. So this is just a VTX that I got, and I'm not really showing you the VTX. I'm really showing you more of the form factor. and why I like this half board, or less than a full board 30 by 30 mount. And I'm showing you that for a relatively unfortunate reason. So this is the 20 by 20 Emax 4-in-1, the 6S model, and this is the best 20 by 20 4-in-1 that I've found so far that's had the most consistent performance. And that being said, they themselves recommend you don't use this board on more than 1700 or 1750 kV 6S, and I have tried it on more, and I completely agree with them. Once you start using it on even 1750 kV, you start getting inconsistent performance from the board. It really kind of hits the limits, and then some quality issues probably come into play, and it kind of struggles a little bit. So these are the Emax 1600 kV motors, and they perform fine on this 20 by 20. But unfortunately, we haven't gotten to the point where we can trust these smaller these just generally smaller ESC boards with full 5-inch quads. They might work great for racing, especially on like a 2205 motor or something that's relatively lower load, but for full like acro 5-inch, I've yet to find a 20 by 20 that I can fully trust. I've actually been sticking to the full size 30 by 30 boards because they can handle a little bit more, especially with some of the boards that have the large caps on them. This is the $30 4-in-1 that I kind of found a while back, the one from Banggood, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But take a look at the VTX on top of here. It's a 30 by 30, and then on top of here also it's a 30 by 30. And the way that I wire my quads up these days is I always put the flight controller in the back now, so I always have wires going back and forth. And I like the half board, but I hope that going forward we kind of start seeing full size 30 by 30 4-in-1s that have 20 by 20 mount, because I really prefer the 20 by 20 mount overall. And the other reason why I'm showing you these two is because this is the Hobbywing 4-in-1, which I have found to have the most consistent performance among all 4-in-1s, including the Acon 32-bit 4-in-1. And when I say consistent performance, I mean when you pump the gas, you don't get any dipping, you don't get any weird performance, and across multiple boards, I've gotten very consistent performance. This quad has seen about a dozen motors, and finally I burnt out my Hobbywing 4-in-1. And then I noticed that there are tons of people burning out this Hobbywing 4-in-1, and then Hobbywing themselves recognized that they are burning out in a higher quantity than they expected, so they are looking into fixing it and trying to see if they can fix it, and they are planning on replacing those people's boards that burnt out, which is very, very nice of them. And I just had to mention that because that is very, very nice of them. Let's see if they actually follow through with it. This is the $35 board. This is from Airbot, and it's $30 or $35. And I still like this board, and this board has very, very, very close performance to the Acon 32-bit 4-in-1 and that Hobbywing 32-bit 4-in-1. It comes in third place by just a hair with respect to consistency and actual dishing out of the power. And it's really minor, and this quad actually performs really, really nicely too. I have burnt out 2 of these boards so far. I have found personally that boards that come from Airbot just tend to break. Like almost more than half of the boards I've used that have come from Airbot or are rebranded from Airbot have burnt out or broken before I have retired the quad. And I retire quads pretty quickly. Like I don't really hold on to any quad for like an extended period. I think my oldest quad was like 4 months maybe, and had seen maybe 200 packs. And so yeah, I mean, boards burn out. I wish that somebody could figure out why on earth these freaking ESCs keep burning out. If we crash, if we bump, I mean, I've heard all sorts of theories, but boards still burn out. And so yeah, I went from a VTX to this discussion. Thought it was a nice transition. Anyways, so this is the frame. If you've noticed the frame, this is my latest revision of my acro frame, or the premium acro frame that I'm working on. This is the previous model with the arms on the inside. I found that this lowered height is just an absolute pain to build with the arms in the way, and it doesn't really make much difference at all with respect to flight performance, and you get more props in view because it's the GoPro sitting lower. So I went back to putting the arms on the bottom, and this quad actually has a different finish on it. So this main plate is actually a regular finish, but you can't really see it. But if you take a look at this plate here and then the arms in general, this is actually it's a resin dipped finish, and it's matte. I asked them, they had a glossy version, so I asked them to make it matte, and I thought I was being real clever. I was going to come up with a new finish on the carbon to make it really nice and good feeling. but they kind of are not able to give me a really consistent surface on it, and I actually like the oil rubbed finish of Astro X more, so we're just going to go with the oil rubbed finish with a light chamfer. This is kind of a heavy chamfer on the edges. We're going to go with a very light chamfer. If you'll notice, the top plate of this frame has absolutely parallel all the way down, and this is like my new mechanism for putting the battery straps on, which is really nice and clean. There's no more loopholes in the sides or anything like that. I really am looking forward to this frame coming out because it's kind of a blending of the fluoride and the floss style. It has independent arms. It does weigh a little bit more, but the entire fuselage is longer, so it has more room for the battery on the back, and the camera moved forward a little bit as well, so you get less props in view. If you want to get no props in view, you could use just a Hero 6 or a Hero 7, and that has a higher lens, and you don't get props in view at about 20 degrees angle, which is what I was going for, because I expect even myself to eventually move to the Hero 7 or whatever the newest one is, because I'm going to run out of Session 5s when I break them all. And yeah, so it performs really well. It weighs a little bit more, but okay, it's coming. Got a lot to talk about. So this is the Babyhawk R Pro. This they sent this to me, and I'm pretty sure they sent me a defective one that was handmade, and I'm going to use this as an example. So I'll tell you about the quad. The quad actually performs fine. It actually performs very, very similar to the Babyhawk R original, the 2-inch version with 2.5-inch arms and 2.5-inch props. It performs almost completely on par. That being said, this Babyhawk R is actually an entirely new product. It has a unibody frame by popular demand, which I don't agree with, but whatever, popular demand, and it's also a 3-inch, so it's unlikely that you're really going to break an arm too easily, although people have been breaking arms on the original Babyhawk Rs, even the arms that I made that were beefed up. And so I'm going to use this as an example for why ready-to-fly quads, or not just RTF quads in general, not ready-to-fly quads, don't go to that website, are actually maybe more headache than they're worth. So first I'm gonna tell you about the quad. So it is a new product from the ground up. The motors are completely new. They have an open bottom, not completely new. They have an open bottom. So they remade the base of the motors. It comes with a new stack, which I have over here. A new stack, which is the Emax Magnum 2 stack, but it's not the 6S variant. It is the 4S variant, and a new FC, which they've designed entirely new. Everything is new about this product. It's an F4 flight controller. It's got everything built in, as you would expect, with a beeper as well. It's great, whatever. So let me tell you about my experience with this quad. So, okay. I got this quad. I was really thrilled because I loved the first version so much that I was really thrilled to try this quad. The first time I flew it with their tune on it, and I'm pretty sure I know who tuned it as well. I don't agree with their tune. If you do buy this quad, I would just reset it back to defaults and then drop your Ps by a third and put it on 8K, 8K. I would not recommend the 32K, 4K, or whatever, 8K, 30, whatever they have as default. I think it's a little bit much, and it's strayed so far from default that it's something that a beginner can't really comprehend or deal with if they flash new firmware. So I would say that if you flash new firmware on the thing, you're fine if you use default settings, and then just drop your Ps by about a third, and it should fly pretty good from there. That being said, the second battery I flew on this quad, one of my 4-in-1s on the ESC burnt out. And I can't even tell what happened on the board because it just doesn't work at all. So I was like, crap, this sucks, but I have an Ori 32. I'll just replace that thing, that 4-in-1 with the Ori 32, which I'm not really too crazy about either, but I put the Ori 32 in here. And the way this thing is constructed is that I've asked them this more than once, that I really wish that they put metal hardware on this, but it's all plastic hardware, which is really annoying. But I replaced it with my own metal hardware, and also they have the dampening on these rubber things underneath, built into the actual base of the frame. So when you do put screws through it and you try to tighten it down, you're gonna squish the head of the screw through the rubber dampening thing, and you don't want to do that. And so when I put it together and I flew it, it was awful. It was like it had Tourette's. And I've said in the past that these tiny little quads, they actually exhibit all of the issues of large 5-inch quads more than the 5-inch quad. So if you have vibration issues, it actually comes out in the flight controller and the actual flight performance more than the 5-inch. At least that has been my experience. So what did I do? I went in there and I kind of loosened everything up. I loosened these screws up way more than they were until the whole stack was super squishy and would move around. And then I tried flying it again and it was still flying like it had Tourette's on it. So I went back into the settings and I jacked up all of the filters all the way up to max, all the way to the point where it was actually affecting the flight performance. So then I went out and flew it again because the flight controller doesn't have a black box on it, so I couldn't actually read the vibrations to actually tune the filters. Went out and flew it again, and it helped maybe 10%. And sorry, I don't have any FPV footage, but it pretty much flies like Tourette's. It's just like it yaws, it just twitches on the yaw like crazy. And so I tried to, fiddling with the tune, and then nothing really helped. So then I took it a step further, and I put tape underneath the motors, like the old-fashioned soft mounting your motor method, and I flew it again, did nothing. And then at this point, I was determined to make this thing fly relatively smoothly. So I went ahead and I removed the flight controller from the stack entirely, and I just taped it to the top of the shell, let it float in there, so it was completely removed from the base plate. And I flew it, and it helped maybe 50%, but it was still flying like it has Tourette's. So I was just like, okay, this flight controller must be dead. Something must have happened to completely break the thing. I'm just going to replace the flight controller. So then I replaced the flight controller, and I put the F4 Talon on there, which I love. I love the F4 Talon. It's my favorite flight controller. And I went to plug in a battery, and I think I put the power wire to the flight controller in backwards, and I just burnt out everything. One of the ESCs on the 4-in-1 burnt out, the flight controller burnt out, the receiver burnt out, and the VTX is the only thing that still works. So this is just an absolutely cursed quad that I could not get to fly, and I'm just showing it to you as an example of what you may come to expect when you buy a ready-to-fly quad. And this is the worry that I have when I recommend ready-to-fly options to newcomers, is that I don't know if they're going to run into this, and I'm going to have to help them fix it, and it's going to be a pain, and they're pretty much going to have to rebuild the quad, and I don't know if it's going to work out at all. That being said, this is a good product. I actually liked the props. I liked the way it flew when I had it, and I think it was a great quad. However, I don't think it has the same impact that the first Babyhawk R had, because nowadays we have just better everything, and it has been updated, and everything about this is way better than the original Babyhawk R, but it also comes in at a higher price point, which is still a really good deal. But at that price point, it's kind of like you can build a good 5-inch. It's kind of a toss-up. It's still a really good deal, and it still performs really well. I just happen to get a really crapped out version of it. So this is what y'all probably came here to see, which are these motors. Actually, let's talk about these motors first. I'm going to give you a quick overview of these motors, and I'm going to have another video discussing something that's a little bit more off the wall about motors in general from all the testing I've done of all these motors. So I've been testing prototypes of motors for months and months right now. Like I said, this quad has seen over more than a dozen motors. I'm going to keep swapping motors in and out to test things on the same quad with the same settings and the same everything to see how it performs from motor to motor. And surprisingly, I can tell quite a variation between motors. So this is the motor that is from T-Motor. This is the motor. So we previously were working with Brother Hobby and another company, just a joint kind of production between Brother Hobby and another company to try and make the motor more ours or more custom, get kind of different quality. And we were still having supply chain issues, so we went to T-Motor to see what they can do. T-Motor actually said that they could supply quite a number of motors, but once we gave them our requirements list, once I gave them the list of things that I wanted in the motor, they pretty much had to rebuild the motor from scratch. And then once they did that, they had trouble actually supplying the quantity of motors that we wanted. So that quantity that they could supply is very, 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 very small. So it's not really a motor that's reasonable to manufacture. That being said, this is easily the very best freestyle motor that I have flown to date. It is a 2207.8. It's not a 2207.5 when you measure the stator. I'm going to go over, like I said, just general differences between these two. So you now know why we are not selling this one, and this one is actually on the market. This is the Brother Hobby product. It is a 2207.8 again, and there are some differences between these two motors. So this one from T-Motor is 35 grams, it's 34 grams. This one from Brother Hobby is like 29.5 grams. They were able to chop 4.5 grams off the same size motor. That's kind of shocking to me, because it's really shocking, because these two motors perform very, very comparably. But let's look at the differences. So this is the motor that I specified for T-Motor to make. I gave them all my specifications. I wanted 9mm bearings, I wanted quality bearings, I wanted a 2.5mm base with a chamfered base going up into the bottom of the bell so it's nice and strong. I wanted a lip on the bottom of the magnets. I wanted strong magnets, curved magnets, 1.8mm, at least 1.8mm thick magnets, single strand windings. I wanted a titanium shaft all the way through. I wanted it as light as they could possibly do. 16x16 mount, write the information of the motor on the base, nothing really on the bell, and a shaft that's long enough to fit the props on, like the whole prop hub with a full-size nut on, and I wanted 20mm wires and some other little details inside, 0.15mm laminations and some other details about the stator. Basically, I gave them all the things that I could possibly think of that I wanted on a motor, like this grip on the bottom of the prop hub so it doesn't slip much, this particular grip, the one that they make, which is really nice. And so they made me that motor, and it's freaking awesome. This is a 1922 kV motor, which is a little bit high for 6S, but like I said, I'm going to talk about that in the next video. Now let's compare it to the Brother Hobby product. Now this is a product which I told Brother Hobby generally the same list, but they kind of re-engineer everything themselves. And they definitely, these two companies are some of the best multi-rotor or mini quad motor companies we have. And so both of them definitely know what they're doing when it comes to engineering a motor. But Brother Hobby and T-Motor, they see things very differently, and they do things very, very, very differently. As you can tell just clearly from the casing, the Brother Hobby casing is a much more finely kind of manufactured and detailed casing. That being said, they did copy the prop hub, like little things, like the rough surface that T-Motor has, which I appreciate, because that is a very, very nice kind of grip. But in general, you can see that it's a more refined looking motor. So now let's look at differences between these two motors, which are kind of extreme. Let's actually look at these. So this is the T-Motor, this is the Brother Hobby 2207.8. Flip them over, you can instantly see something very obvious. The magnets on the Brother Hobby motor are about half the thickness of the T-Motor. And they are also about 0.5 millimeters taller than the T-Motor, so they actually overlap the stator of the Brother Hobby stator. They look like they're wider, but they're not actually any wider. They're the same width as the T-Motor magnets. And now let's compare these to the old construction Hyperlite motor, which has, thick magnets. What you would expect, what we wanted, thick magnets, but it's also a 7mm height. This is actually a 2307, but the 2207 is about 29.5, 29.8 grams, and they made the 2207.8 the same weight as the 2207, which is shocking. But they do things differently. Like I said, they don't have the lip on the bottom of the magnets. They've never put that on, but they've also never had a problem with magnets slipping like many other motor companies have. I would still, however, like to have that extra lip on the bottom. Just makes me feel better. The stators are actually very different as well as the entire base of the motor. So they're actually going with 0.2mm laminations. It looks like, I can't really tell clearly, but when I compare it to the T-Motor, which has 0.15mm, as well as the old Hyperlite product, which is also 0.15mm laminations, it looks like they are just slightly bigger, so I'm going to guess that they're 0.2 millimeters. These laminations really have more to do with efficiency than anything else. They don't really make that big of a difference, and as Get FPV has told me, all their motors, all the Get FPV motors, Luminaire motors, have 0.2 millimeter laminations because they don't really see a benefit, and it's just more expensive to produce for them, and they would have to jack up the price of the motor. So compared to the T-Motor, you can see that the base of the Brother Hobby motor is the same thickness, thankfully, and also it's shorter. It's a much shorter base, and they did that to increase the durability because now they're sporting a 9mm bearing all the way through both of these motors, which is super nice compared to the old motor, which is an 8mm bearing, the outer diameter of the bearing. But you might notice something very obvious, which is that aluminum rim around the bearing is smaller because they had to make room for that bearing. Plus, they didn't want to shrink the stator too much because they wanted to maintain the volume of iron in the stator, which is very important. So they had to redesign the stator and reduce the iron a little bit to compensate for that 9mm bearing. But that 9mm bearing is probably the single biggest improvement of all these new motors coming out. I mean, 9mm bearings are nothing new, but at least the new motors are considering it because they are just better. They're just way better in the air, way smoother overall. They resist crashes way better. They don't get crunchy like the 8mm. They're just better overall. And the shorter base makes it more durable because there's less of a lever arm for the bottom of the base to break if you do crack against the side of the motor. So between these motors, I've pretty much pointed out all the differences. Otherwise, they're all pretty much, the 2207.8s are about the same, and they also perform very, very, very similarly. Right now, the new Hyperlite 2207.8 motor comes in 1722 kV, 2222 kV, 2622 kV, I think, and one of the other KVs. It doesn't come, there isn't a KV between 1722 and 2222, which I think we will need to add in because I personally think that around 1850 to 1900 kV is the perfect KV for 6S acro, regardless of what prop you use. And I'm going to go over why that is in the next video. And it's mainly because the higher KV just feels way better in the air. It just feels like it has way, way more control than the rest of the other KVs that I've tried. But I'm going to stop there and just say, all that being said, these two motors, the two products from Brother Hobby and T-Motor, the Brother Hobby product, it has a much lighter bell. The bell is about 3 grams lighter than the T-Motor, so it should have much faster response, but the magnets are also not as powerful, and I can tell that. I mean, they're the same power, they're just less volume of magnet, and I can tell they're less powerful because when I take something metal and just kind of put it against the side of the T-Motor and try to pull it off compared to the Brother Hobby, I can definitely tell that the T-Motor is much stronger. Now, does that make an actual difference in flight performance, and does the 0.5mm overlap of the Brother Hobby compensate for the thinner magnet? It seems to, is the best answer that I have. I mean, compared side by side, I can definitely tell a difference, and the T-Motor definitely feels like it has just a hair more control, but we're really splitting hairs here, and it's really just comparing them side by side, and you would really have to try a lot of motors to be able to tell the difference. For the general user, even the pro user, you would have a very hard time telling the difference between the two, but me personally, since I have tested so many motors now, I really like the T-Motor, and I really wish I can get more of these motors. Okay, that's all for this video for now. Take care. Don't forget to floss. The next one's coming up.